Hi everyone. So I showed my development environment a while ago, and I made some updates to use Claude Code. And I know this design seems overly complex to do that, but I also had to keep in mind that in the near future, I would like to set up networks of agents to start building out workflows to do some of the tedious things that I don't want to do. So just as a reminder, the old development environment that I had looked something like this, and it was quite simple, and I've used it for a few years. But basically, I built out a server, and on that server, I have a Ubuntu server, and I use VS Code remote development to compile and work with the source code, and also launch the backend so I could test the multiplayer networking and all that over the LAN. And also I have a couple mirror drives to use as my NAS. And I know both these designs are missing some details, but it gives sort of the general overview. So my work has strongly encouraged me to start using AI, and I actually found it to be a bit more useful than I anticipated. And I don't know if it'll be helpful with my Rust code, but I think it'd be very helpful, for example, making a website and doing some of the stuff that I don't want to have to relearn. And so for that alone, I thought it was worth it. And one of the issues is I didn't really want to install Claude Code where I have my personal files because the easiest solution would have been to install Claude Code directly on the Ubuntu server. And maybe I'm just a bit overly paranoid, but I just didn't like that idea. And also, I really like the idea of models sort of checking each other's work, because at my job, I have access to a few models, and I noticed that the models sort of have a different, I guess you would call it, perspective on the problems. And it would be kind of cool to set up a system where they can iterate back and forth between each other to come up with the best solution. I don't even know if that's possible, but it's something I've been thinking about. So I wanted to start off with something that I could easily spin up different agents and share inputs and outputs between them. So I looked at a couple of different ways to do this, either using Docker or setting up VMs, and I like the VM approach. So I use KVM, and I've never used it before, but it was pretty easy to use. I was using the command line, but I felt that installing Vert Manager was worth it because it just made configuration and things a bit easier. So on my Windows machine, I have Hyper-V and an Ubuntu desktop with Vert Manager, and I just connect over, and that seemed to work really well. And as far as VMs go, I have the dev environment now, which has VS Code remote server, which is similar to the other design, but also has Claude Code and all the tools I need to develop. There's also a shared directory. So between the Linux VMs, I use NFS, but out to my Windows machine, I use SMB, and I have it mapped to a network drive. So what this means is all my repos can live in one place, and I can still, on my Windows machine, compile and launch the client as if I was before, but Claude Code now has access to make modifications to those files. And I can still work on the back end in the same way I was using remote development. I originally wasn't going to have all the repos in a different VM like this, and I was just going to hold them locally inside the dev environment, which I think will get annoying once I have different agents trying to communicate with each other and access their files. But nonetheless, this is what I had tried, and I was just port forwarding the services that I needed, like SSH or the game client and all those things, and that worked okay. But the problem I ran into was for each one of these network drives that I was mapping, I couldn't change in Windows 10 the default SMB port. So that ended up being a problem. And so I created a bridge, but I didn't know much about bridging. This also took me a bit of time because I didn't realize if you bridge a physical interface, you lose connectivity to the interface. So the VM that I was trying to NAT lost internet connectivity, and I ended up having to just do the bridge correctly. And now each one of these VMs gets its own IP on my LAN, which I think is fine. It actually makes things a bit easier when I want to launch local websites for testing and things like that. So to show what this looks like, this is my Windows machine where I typically develop, and this one's connected to the network drive, which is mapped over to DevShare. And if we look, I can still run the client, and there's no backend right now, so it's going to be all messed up, but you get the idea. And ignore the warnings, I don't believe in them. And over here, I can still run the server. And if I go here, you can see the files, and I can create files, and you can see them on the Windows side, and I can remove the files. You can see it's gone, and I can also launch Claude from here. You can also SSH with a different terminal and launch Claude that way, but this is also okay. So anyways, that's it. Thank you if you made it this far, and take care.